Hi everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Devin, and today I'm going to be sharing my battle with depression. So at the beginning of last year, so 2021, I had two significant events happen that really triggered my depression. The first one being I had somebody very close to me, somebody who holds a lot of authority in my life, tell me that I am not enough. I'm not enough for anybody. I'm not enough. I'm just not enough, and that's why everybody walks out of my life. And that was really hard to hear because I am already somebody who tends to feel like I'm this big burden, and so for somebody so close to me to tell me that, it just broke me. The second thing that happened is very personal, so I'm not going to share any details, but I will say it was traumatizing, and it left me completely broken. And those two things really, I think I was just in shock and denial about them, and so I didn't really feel any emotion or have any emotion. I just felt really numb for a really long time, and it wasn't until October of the same year, and that's when I started to sort of feel again, and I started to battle those two things and what they had done and the pain that they had started to cause me, and but I felt so much like a burden, so I just started to battle it alone, and it wasn't until late November when depression really started to take over. I slowly lost interest in everything that I had once loved. I was tired all the time. I spent most days, I spent every day sleeping until 12 and staying up until 4 a.m. And I don't mean I stayed up on my phone or watching TV. I stayed up laying in bed for hours just crying and just going over like every mistake I've ever made, and how I just wished that this pain would just stop. Just even if it was for a moment, I just would cry because I just wanted it to stop. I suffered from really, really bad headaches that were triggered by light or sound, sometimes both. So I just stayed a majority of December and January just in my room. But I think the worst thing that I struggled with, and I still absolutely struggle with, is the worthlessness. It just came to a point where it was just like, why am I here? I don't want to be here. I just feel worthless. I have no worth. I have no value. And there was a week in December where I fell into self-harm because I just wanted to feel anything other than what I was feeling. I spent all of December and January praying to God that something would just take me away, and because I no longer wanted to feel this pain. I no longer wanted to be here. There was nothing that made it worth it for me to be here. And I felt like just praying that something would take me away. That was my only option because I didn't know what else to do. But something that I really wanted to share with you guys is a big turning point in my battle with depression. It was the first week of February, and I was here at a midweek. And most midweeks, I went home with a really bad headache. The midweeks were really hard to come to because of how bad my head would hurt after due to all the lights and the sound. And this night in particular was the hardest, not the hardest, the worst headache I've ever experienced. And I've never passed out, and I really thought I was. I was having trouble standing up. I was having trouble seeing. I I felt so sick to my stomach. And so I laid down and I drank water, I took Tylenol, I was just trying everything I could think of to make this headache go away that had worked in the past, but wasn't working this night in, like I said, in particular. And earlier that day, I had read Jeremiah 29:13, which is, "You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." So I sat up and I leaned forward and I said, "God, I don't really know what to say other than just please take this pain away." That was it. I don't know what else to say. And the second I said amen, God had completely taken all the pain away of my headache, which was so powerful to me. And I immediately just started crying my eyes out because I knew that was his way of telling me that if I can take this headache away, I can take this depression away. In fact, a song that I've listened to on repeat since struggling with depression is "Peace" by Hillsong Young and Free. And one of the lines is, "Peace is a promise you keep." And so again, I knew that was his way of promising me that he was going to take depression away and he was going to take the pain that I was in away. And I will say that depression is still a battle I fight every day, and it's hard, and I've sought therapy and medication, and those things help, but it's still something that I'm struggling with every day, and it's very real for me, and it's hard. I have my hard days, my hard weeks where I have struggles seeing my value or my worth, or I just think, am I going to fall back into deep depression again where I just no longer want to be here? But it's that promise he made to me that night in February when he took away my headache. That's what keeps me going. But it's still hard. It's still a daily struggle.
Lord, you are the God who saves me. Day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to hear my cry. I'm overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I'm counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like one without strength. I'm set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest of depths. Your wrath lies heavily on me. You've overwhelmed me with all your waves. You've taken me from my closest friends, and you've made me repulsive to them. I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? But I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken me from a friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. Lord Jesus, be with us in this discussion, God. God, I pray that even now as we feel distracted, or even maybe some of us have sort of a wall up around our heart, we don't want to hear it. We don't want to know what you're going to say tonight. We'd rather just ignore it and talk to our neighbors. God, I pray for the next just 20 minutes, Lord, that this would be a night where you would open our ears, that we would hear and understand what you have for us, and then it would transform our hearts. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you, Devin, for sharing that. I appreciate that a lot. I know that was not easy. You guys might see a QR code up on the screen right now. Devin was not the only staff who shared their story with depression. We also had Rachel share her story. They're both longer stories, so I couldn't combine them. But it's important to me that you guys hear Rachel's story because I think it's important that you understand that even though we're here and we're leaders, we have struggles too. So go ahead and scan that and then swipe up and move it out of the way. You can listen to that maybe later tonight. It's about 12 minutes long. It's a really good story, also dealing with depression. I would really appreciate it if you listen to that. It takes a lot of guts to get up and tell that story, and Devin and Rachel did that, and I want you to hear it. So as you can probably tell tonight, we are going to talk about depression, and I'm going to throw in a new word that we need to talk about, and that is the word despair. Tonight we're going to talk about depression and despair. Now, before I get into this, if you are a guest, if you're here for the first time, and I think there's quite a few of you here tonight, normally when we get up on the stage as youth group, we kind of want to make the sermons fun. We have a good opening, and it's like we get people laughing. We kind of have something, a good time, right? And then we talk serious. But in this series, Oh My Soul, where we're walking through mental health in the book of Psalms, sometimes the topic is just a little bit sad, like this one. And so you're not going to hear me kind of make any effort there. I'm just going to dive right into this, okay? So if any of you in this room have dealt with or are currently dealing with depression, I beg of you, I really do beg of you. This sermon has been in the works since October. It's been a part of our plans. We've been praying for you. We've been praying for this night. I ask you to listen. And if you have a neighbor next to you that's just kind of giving you a hard time, maybe just move somewhere else. This night was for you because God loves you and he wanted you to hear it. Some of you in this room, you have to forgive me for sounding dramatic, but when it comes to depression, sometimes our mistake is not that we're dramatic about it, it's that we understate it. Some of you in this room have been beaten ruthlessly by depression. A sadness that no matter how hard you try or how hard you pray, never seems to go away. Some of you know what it's like to make it look like you're okay, but make no mistake, you are not okay. Some of you know what it's like to never want to get out of bed, to want to sleep your life away. Some of you know what it's like to have a feeling of despair so strong that you actually believe that there is no more hope. Some of you know what it's like to cry and never feel any better. Some of you know what it's like when the psalmist said, I'm overwhelmed with troubles and my life draws near to death. I'm counted among those who go down to the pit. Some of you know what it's like to have thoughts about ending it all once and for all. Tonight, if that's you, I want you to know that this is a safe place for that version of you. So we've been doing this series. It's called Oh My Soul. Most of you know this. Some of you don't, so I'm going to tell you. In this series, we've taken a few stops in the book of Psalms to investigate things like fear, abandonment, anger, disappointment, and tonight, depression and despair and prolonged sadness. What we've learned over the weeks, and we'll learn again tonight, is that God really genuinely, and this is the part that most people don't understand, God really genuinely desires us to bring to him whatever we're feeling. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're feeling, God's desire is that you bring that to him. He wants us to know that number one, it's okay to struggle. Number two, it's okay to feel. And number three, it's okay to scream. Because sometimes that's the only thing that you can do. And tonight, as we kind of approach the topic of depression, I already read to you Psalm 88, 1 through 18. I want to tell you something about the psalm. It's a psalm written by a man who struggled deeply with sadness throughout his life. I want you to know something else about the psalm. It's the only psalm in the entire book of Psalms, which is the biggest book in the Bible, that does not end well. The final line of this psalm is basically, God, you've taken my friends away and left me in the pit of despair. That's how the psalm ends. And inside this psalm, we learn actually a few things that if you've dealt with depression, you know these things all too well. But if you haven't, we learn some things about depression. The first thing that we learn is that when we are depressed or in despair or deeply saddened for a prolonged period of time, we have questions for God. The first thing that happens when you are depressed is you go, God, why would you let me feel like this? You ask questions. Look at Psalm 88, verse 14, the psalm we just read. Look what the author says. He says, why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? He's asking God a question. I've sought you, I've prayed to you, I've asked that you take this away, and nothing. Why would you do that to me? The first thing that we do in depression, or one of the things we do in depression, is in it. We often wonder, why would God let me go through this? It's almost impossible to be dealing with deep depression and not wonder why God would allow you to feel that kind of pain. And feeling the pain isn't the worst part. It's the fact that the pain will never go away. At least that's how it feels. First thing we learn in Psalm 88 is that when we're depressed, we have questions for God. The second thing is when we're depressed, we tend to blame God. I don't know if you guys caught this as I read it, but did you notice that the author of this chapter in the Bible is blaming God for his pain? Multiple times. Listen to this, Psalm 88, 6-8. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily on me. You have overwhelmed me with all of your waves. You have taken me from my closest friends and have made me repulsive to them. This author is blaming God for all that has happened to them. And I've talked to many teenagers who are struggling with depression, many adults. This is what we do. We go, God, if you're there, why wouldn't you do this? This is you, Lord. Like we almost get upset. When we're depressed, we tend to blame God. And when we're depressed, hope feels like a fantasy. Look at Psalm 88, 15-17. From my youth, I've suffered and been close to death. This is an adult man writing this. All my life, I've suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long, they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. This is a human being who does not feel like there's any hope left. Because the sadness and pain that they are experiencing has been something that they've experienced all their life. Many people misunderstand depression as well. So we learn in this text, just to recap, when we're depressed, we have questions for God. When we're depressed, we tend to blame God. And when we're depressed, hope feels like a fantasy. And those things are true about depression, by the way. But there's another thing that we often believe about depression that is not true. And it's one of the main misunderstandings of depression. Most people, many people, would refer to depression as simply a feeling. Your depression is not real. There's nothing really wrong. It's just something you feel. And when people perceive depression that way, you'll hear little things like this. And this is especially in the church. So when I'm talking about the church, I'm talking about the church of Jesus, like Christians who gather and go to church, and also the big C church. That means that all the Christians in the world are also referred to as the church. And a lot of the times when you are having conversations with people in the church about depression, it gets tied very closely to faith. The misconception is that it's simply a feeling, and you might hear things like this: if you just have more faith, God will take it away. Or if you just trust God, there's got to be something wrong. You did something wrong, or you're not trusting God, because if you were to trust God, He would heal you. And the last one is not as passive-aggressive, honestly, as it typically sounds, but it comes across something like this. Well, have you prayed that God would take it? Like, are you praying to God? See, the assumption in these questions is that your depression is somehow your fault. You're not doing something right, therefore you feel this way. And while I don't want to dismiss that outright, because I think a lot of the times we are the reason that our depression lingers, which I'll get to in a second, I think it's very rare that we are the reason that we have depression. While these are typically well-meaning things that people say, they're very rarely helpful. And quite often leave us feeling more alone, more sad, and more broken. You see, we at the church here, we kind of sometimes do that. We accidentally, when we want to push you to God and make it about your faith, we accidentally make it worse because we forget about you in the process. Depression is more than a feeling. Depression is more than a feeling. I'm going to put a picture up on the screen. I want you to look at this. This is your brain, not yours specifically. It would look very different if we scanned it. The right side of your brain is responsible for emotional processing. The left side of your brain is responsible for logical processing. Meaning when we're using the right side of our brain, the right side of our brain is the part of the brain that typically is responsible for our emotions. The left side of our brain is typically responsible for our logic and our reason. In a healthy brain, one that is not dealing with depression and despair, processing or thinking through a thing goes back and forth between the right and left. We think through things emotionally and we think through things logically. And it's both sides of the brain that help us consider our emotions and whether or not what we feel is actually true. You see, the reality is you can feel things that are not true. You can feel like your life is over when your life is not over. You can definitely feel emotions that are not true. And your logical side of your brain will help you process that when your brain is functioning outside of a depression and despair state. So, for example, if you're at home and you're alone and you're watching Criminal Minds, not talking to anyone in here, but some of you watch Criminal Minds, and if you were home alone at night watching Criminal Minds, and all of a sudden you heard a bang in your house, the right side of your brain just reacted to that sound. Now you're home alone and you hear that bang, instantly you develop fear. The amygdala, the right side of your brain is starting to work, right? What you're going to do, hopefully, if you're not frozen in the right side of your brain, is you're going to get up and you're going to look around. And when you notice that the picture that's hanging on the wall is now on the ground broken, all of a sudden the fear is going to go away. Why? Because you're not in danger. In fact, your observation that the left side of your brain used helps you to see that the picture on the wall fell. So while it scared you and ignited the right side of your brain, the left side of your brain helped you calm down. That's a good example about how the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain work together. Now, in despair and in depression, something very strange and unique happens. Okay? We're going to talk the difference between despair and depression. I'm going to be careful with this because I'm not an expert, although I've studied this a lot and talked to a lot of people about this, so here we go. In despair and depression, the left and the right side of the brain begin to disconnect. Let's show the next one, okay? You'll see this barrier. This is just a visual thing. There's not something called barrier that goes in between the right side and left of your brain. It's literally just a picture. The right side and left side of the brain begin to develop a barrier, and they actually stop communicating, or they communicate less. So you'll have people who struggle with overusing the right side or the emotional side of the brain or the left side and the logical side of their brain. So in despair, we begin to struggle to feel anything at all. Despair is when the left side of our brain is functioning overtime and the right side of our brain is not. We feel nothing. You'll hear people talk about depression a lot of the times. They'll say, I just felt numb. I felt nothing. That is not actually depression. That is despair. They're close to each other, but it's different. In depression, we actually are using the right side of our brain, and we struggle to feel too much of an emotion. Okay? When you hear someone talking about that, then they're explaining oftentimes that they have too much of a specific pain and they'd rather feel anything but that pain. Often you'll hear someone who moves from depression to despair, but understanding that one of them functions with a different side of the brain helps you understand that it's not just emotion, it's actually become something biological. So, when you are talking about depression, self-harm is a big part of it, right? Self-harm is actually very deeply tied to depression and despair. So in despair, when I feel numb, I feel nothing. Oftentimes people self-harm so that they can feel anything. I just want to feel something, so I self-harm. In depression, the language is more like this. I hurt myself to feel anything other than what I'm feeling. So there's an overwhelming pain, an overwhelming emotion. They're tired of it because it's just too much. So the self-harm comes to distract them from that pain. So there's a large difference between depression and despair, although they're very similar. And the way our brain works in depression and despair is actually very similar. It just uses different sides of the brain. I tell you that because I want you to understand that depression is not just an emotion. Depression is also something that becomes biological, or can begin biologically. When we get like this, and now I'm going to move away from the difference, because really, in a lot of ways, when we talk about depression and despair, there's similarities. So here we go. When we get depressed or despaired, we feel lost. Listen up, gentlemen, back row, left side, please. We feel lost. We feel broken. We feel very broken, like there's this sense of something's wrong with me. We feel alone. Oftentimes there's this feeling like if I tell someone, they won't understand, or if I tell someone, they'll think of me differently. And often all of those things lead to this feeling of hopelessness. I'm never going to get better. It's always going to be like this. I'm going to feel this pain or this emptiness forever. And when we get to a place of hopelessness, well, the psalmist said it well. He said, you've put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. And being there is hard enough, but once we get there, we also have no idea how to get out. Depression and despair feel like being stuck at the bottom of a pit with no hope of climbing out. And so, in that place, we have questions for God. We blame God, which is exactly what our psalmist is doing in this psalm. And hope feels like a fantasy. Those are the things that we've learned about depression and despair from the psalm, but we've not discussed what we can learn from it and actually help us how to deal with depression and despair. So real quickly, I'm going to show you this. Let's ask a few questions about this psalm, okay? We already said that Psalm 88 is the only psalm in the scripture that ends sad, has a terrible ending. In fact, it's a psalm that's very raw, and the psalmist does not seem to be very happy with God or even have a lot of hope in God. But here's my question for you. Does God tell him to stop? Does God tell him not to speak? Does God say, that's enough, I get what you're trying to say? Does God say anything at all? At any point in the psalm, do you hear or see God interrupt, stop them, or say, it's my turn now, I know that you're upset, but here's my side of it? Do we see any of that in the psalm? We don't. Why? Devin, I'll have you know that I wrote this sermon before I watched your video. Here's why I think God says nothing, and here's why I think that God allows the psalmist to continue. Jeremiah 29, 12 through 13. God says, then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. God listens. If you're in this room tonight and you are struggling with depression, I need you to hear this. I think this is from God, and I think it's right for you, and I think it's for your heart right now. The reason God doesn't speak is because all the time that the psalmist was speaking, God was listening. You see, we're not accustomed to this. A lot of the times when we're talking, people are thinking about what they're going to say next or thinking about how they're going to respond, but that's not what God's doing. A good listener is not talking or planning what to say next. They simply listen, which is what God does when you cry out to him. I think this psalm is here, and I think it's raw, number one, because God is simply listening to the cries. The other reason I think it's there is as a gift. I mean, of all the prayers, of all the moments where human beings have been talking to God and having this conversation with God, of all of those ever recorded, this is one that God takes and says, I want this in the Bible. I want this conversation where this person's mad at me, where they're blaming me, where they're questioning me, where they're upset at me. I want that one recorded in the Bible. I want that one so that all my people in the future can know that I will listen, can know that no matter how you feel, how dark, how deep, how broken, how lost, how hopeless, it doesn't matter. If you cry out, I will listen. It's there as a gift. He wants you to know that you can do what the author is doing. You can ask God hard questions. You can tell him how it feels like it's his fault. You can share how helpless and hopeless you have become. And the question is this: why would God allow us to do that? Why would God, the God of the universe who created us, who knows more than us, whose thoughts are higher than us, why would he allow us to do that? For three reasons, and I'll close with this. Number one, because he loves you deeply. You do not have the capacity to understand with the left side of your brain or the right side of your brain the depth of the love that God has for you. It's so deep, it's so real. He knows you better than yourself. He understands you better than yourself. He's felt what you feel. He knows how you feel. You can't hide from him. And the reason he put Psalm 88 in the Bible is because he thought of you and how deeply he loves you, and he wants you to know that he's going to listen. The second reason I think it's in there, that God would put Psalm 88, that why God would do all of this. Actually, I'm not done. Yes, I am. Because when you talk to God, it helps you heal. Number one, God loves you deeply. That's why he would allow us to talk to him so honestly. He loves you deeply. Number two, because when you talk to God, it helps you heal. Did you know that your brain is actually designed and wired to heal? If you are in this room and you struggle with depression and you've not been able to get out of it, I need you to hear this and I need you to hear it clearly. Every study from every neurologist or every psychologist in the history of the world will tell you that your brain was designed to heal. When you speak words about how you are feeling, it is powerfully healing. Depression causes you to isolate. Depression tells you you're alone. Depression says be alone. It says stay in bed. It says don't eat. It says all kinds of things. It says be by yourself. So sometimes the only person that you can or will talk to is God. The reason that God allows us to speak to him so honestly is because in your depression and isolation, sometimes the only person you'll cry out to is him, and that has power. Number three, because when you feel hopeless, he is hope. Let me say something before I go here real quick. This is important. No matter how much a part of you your pain and depression and despair feels, like I've had so many conversations with people who when they're depressed, they're just like, I am depressed, therefore I am depressed. Therefore I will always be depressed. I am a depressed person. It becomes an identity. Hi, my name's Mike. I'm depressed. I always will be. It's the life. It sucks, whatever. That's a lie. Your depression is not you. You can heal. You might feel depressed. You might feel despair, but that is not who you are. And it never has been, and it never will be. I'm going to close with this. Sunday was Easter. Most of you, many of you know what Easter is all about. It's not about Easter bunnies and Easter eggs and candy or anything like that. It's actually about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Here's what I want you to know. God provided a source of hope that is not dependent on you or how you feel. You see, there's going to be times in your depression where everything just feels lost and hopeless. And you're stuck on one side of the brain in despair or in depression, and you're just like, hope is lost. That is how it feels, but that is never actually true. Hope is not dependent on being able to feel it. In your deepest, darkest moment, Jesus rose from the grave. In your deepest, darkest moment, you are loved. In your deepest, darkest, saddest, most broken moment, you cannot change the truth that you are loved, that the God of this universe died on the cross for your sins. He was punished on your behalf, and he died. He was dead. He was in a grave for 3 days. They had to embalm him. They had to treat his flesh because it was decaying. Jesus actually died. But the hope of all of this is that because he was God, death could not contain him. Jesus, in one moment, went from death to life, defeating death. Meaning that anyone who puts their hope in Jesus Christ has put their hope into someone who has power over death, who has power over darkness, who has power over sadness, who has power over depression, who has power over despair, who has power over fear, who has power over the moments that feel so dark and so deep and so terrible that you feel like there's no hope. He has power over those moments. So whether you feel it or not, that's always true. How you feel in any given moment cannot, does not, will not ever change that Jesus rose from the grave. You know that he has power over all. And I want to invite you. I'm not standing up here right now saying that, look, I told you all this. You can all feel better now. Our depression's gone. Yay. That's not what I'm saying. I want you to understand that what I'm telling you is an anchor. It's something that you can cling to. It is not dependent on how you feel, and you will feel bad. You struggle with depression and despair. I'm not here to heal you from that. I'm not I'm not an expert. I'm here to tell you that the God of the universe loves you and sees you and knows your pain and has risen from the grave. And you can hold on to that no matter how you feel. We're going to sing a song. The song is a declaration of the power of God. And I don't want you to necessarily worry about singing. I want you just to sit there and allow this to be sung over you. And I want you to try and cling to the truth of this. Try to hold fast to the truth of this song. Because in moments when you're in the deepest, darkest pit, you're going to need some anchor to grab onto. And the best one, the only one in my opinion, is Jesus.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I work with the 6th grade girls, and I'm here today to talk to you about my struggles with depression. So, growing up, I'm a pastor's kid, so what that kind of communicated to me from a young age, not from my family, but from others, people who didn't understand my family, and families that didn't have the right motivations, is that whatever I did fully reflected the viewpoints of my father. So with that, I learned at a very young age that I needed to control my emotional responses to things. So if I ever had a negative emotion, I just kind of like shoved it down, moved on from it, avoided talking about it, even with my family, just kind of held it in. And that continued for a lot of my childhood, just because on the outside I was like this very happy kid doing a lot of things, but on the inside I was just trying to present this perfect image of a Christian kid all the time, which was really exhausting. With that, a lot of my friends growing up weren't Christians, and so in that environment as well, it was just a lot of pressure to not be hypocritical and not make mistakes. It's within human nature to make mistakes, so in that too, I was just kind of like hiding myself and things I thought people would perceive as a flaw or a kind of like negative emotion, I guess. In middle school, it got a lot harder. I would just have these like deep moments of pain. I didn't realize like the signs of depression at the time. I didn't really come to terms with depression until I was in college. But in those moments, it was so hard for me to feel those negative emotions that I chose to be apathetic. So I chose not, like, I tried so hard not to feel those things, which resulted in me becoming very closed off as a person. I didn't want people to see that side of me, so I kept it hidden as much as possible. And I threw myself into activities. So I worked on my 3 sports, getting as good as I could. I threw myself into clubs. I would do all those things. And in high school, I continued that trend. I'm very introverted at first. I don't gravitate towards large groups of people. So switching to a high school where I didn't know a lot of people, my freshman year I hid. Like, I just didn't want people to see me. I basically only participated in athletics and basketball and softball. I would play my sports. That's where I made my friends. And as I got older, sophomore, junior year, I got involved in clubs and student council and those types of things. And I just threw myself into those activities, hoping to like hold this kind of deeper pain at bay, because I didn't know where it was coming from. There was no reason for me to be feeling that way. And in my head, I was thinking to myself, and I still think this often, is that there's definitely someone with it way worse than me. So, like, it's, like, I don't have the right to feel this way. Like, there's no reason for me to be this sad, this deep pain of, like, worthlessness that I felt. It didn't fit, so I tried to fill those gaps with relationships and friendships and sports and all those things. And so my junior and senior year, I got in a very toxic relationship with my then boyfriend. It was toxic on both sides, but it was very manipulative, and I just, like, because I couldn't fix myself, I was just pouring all that energy into him, trying to fix him, trying to be who he wanted me to be, and finding my identity in that relationship instead of in Christ. And so as I moved out of that relationship, moving into college, when we broke up, and I was away from home. I was away from all my friends from high school, who most of which I don't even talk to anymore to this day. I just felt so unworthy of love and support. And not from my family. Like, I knew I had my parents' support, like, no matter what happened. But with that, I just kind of fell into this, like, zoned out space. Like, I didn't want to feel sad. I didn't want to feel worthless. I didn't want to feel unloved. So I tried to shut it out, and I turned into one of the most apathetic, mean versions of myself I've ever seen for my first year of college. I wasn't eating the way I was supposed to. I just kind of, like, fell apart, but on the outside I was still keeping it all together. I was a part of clubs at my freshman year of college. I hung out with my roommates. I did those activities, but at night I was just on the floor, like, felt like I was drowning. Like, nothing would ever make me feel worthy. I pushed church away. I had some bad experiences my first year of college with church, so I distanced myself, which was one of the worst decisions I could have made in that moment, but it happened. And with that, I was tired of people making assumptions about me. I just kind of distanced myself. Meanwhile, I still had the mentality of, there's someone with this worse than me. This is not that big a deal. Like, I'm fine. I don't need help. This is fine. My sophomore and junior year of college, I got a job as a resident assistant, meaning I lived in housing with freshmen, like, straight out of, like, the first time out of the house. And it was my job to help them with whatever they needed. And going into that job, I was not prepared for what I was going to have to deal with. And so, meanwhile, I feel like I'm drowning and, like, not taking care of what I need to take care of. And I'm regularly talking these, like, barely adults out of taking their own life, or like, drinking their sadness away, or whatever it was. It was just so, I was pouring so much of myself into them that there was nothing left for me. Like, all my empathy for others, everything I had left, it was gone. So I was putting on that front for them, helping them through it, and I was having those regular kind of, like, SOS calls with one particular student. She just was in a really dark place, and when she left that year, I was blessed to have the opportunity to study abroad, so I left the country like it was going to fix me. And my friend texted me, and he's like, by the way, so-and-so just took her life. And that was really hard, because it felt like I was pouring myself into her to help her fix something that I couldn't even fix in myself, and I couldn't even do that for her. So that was really, really hard. And not my fault, but I still blamed myself. So going into junior year was one of the hardest years of my life. I was still an RA, still doing that mental health training job for me personally. And I was putting on this front. I was, laughing, smiling, bubbly. And then on the inside, I was breaking down on my dorm room floor, sleeping all day, not eating, like, just hiding that side of me away from my closest friends at the time, away from everybody. And that was the year I met my best friend in the whole world. And I had distanced myself from church, and she came into my life and just brought the love of Jesus, like, front and center. And I don't think I'd have the support system that outside of my family that I have without her, because she helped me so much. She helped me get through my last years of college. And then COVID hit, and I moved to Goodyear by myself, with no one I knew. And I started teaching, and I just threw myself into teaching, pouring myself into my 4th grade students, and it was fine. I was doing a lot better. Wasn't as sad anymore, wasn't struggling as much with my depression. And then summer hit, and I didn't have school, and I wouldn't get out of bed, and I wouldn't eat, and I wouldn't do those things. And the only times I would really leave the house was for poolsides to hang out with my students for midweek. And I worked so hard to keep that hidden, as much as possible. And I reached the point where I can't keep hiding it anymore. I'm more willing to talk to people about it, people who care about me, who want to support me, but I still struggle to go talk to someone for help, like a therapist, because in my head it still feels like I'm taking that away from someone who needs it more than me.